Hello everybody, it's Mr. McCaver here, ready for another weekend video series, and today we're going to talk about really the birth of modern thought in Europe. And how this really plays out is it's going to be a situation where Europe is changing across the board and every aspect of European life is going through some sort of reformation. Whether it's the day-to-day aspects of people's lives because of the Second Industrial Revolution, the fact that nationalism completely redrawn the map of Europe, or the fact that romanticism is now fully in swing, changing how people view their own emotions and reality around them. What we're going to see is this is all going to have varying impacts on how people view society and how people begin to think. There are so many different influences that are going to be a part of people's lives, whether it's the toleration brought up by the Enlightenment in the early 18th century, whether it's nationalism, socialism, or even the idea of what we call cosmopolitanism, the idea that society does not have to be completely uniform. It can have a ton of different facets, different groups, different religions, different lifestyles. Well, all of this is going to play a major part in how people begin to think. And it's going to be different than earlier ages prior. And this is all going to begin with something that you guys are very familiar with, and that is education. Education in Europe is going to be the key linchpin of change during this time period. And it's going to begin because the majority of the population in Europe is still illiterate as of 1850. And this is a problem. As nations become more and more democratic, people need to become more and more aware of what's going on around them. So nations are going to start spending heavily and investing in primary education to create a literate population that can be responsible voters. And this is going to be huge. It's going to have dramatic lasting impacts on everything in Europe, whether it's religion, whether it's pop culture, or whether it's just day-to-day lives of people. Unfortunately, this will not create a scenario where people are starting to get that advanced college education that's still going to be pretty unique and tied to wealth and prosperity, but outside of that, it's still a dramatic improvement for the average day-to-day person. If you are a person who's not a kid in school, you're also going to see an opportunity to become literate due just to day-to-day things that are happening in people's lives. We'll see newspapers become something that everyone is now able to obtain. They're a penny, maybe two, in order to get the daily newspaper that comes out. We're also going to see magazines become huge instruments of portraying culture and fashion, because companies will pay for space in a magazine to promote their products. And now that products are cheap and easy to afford, people are going to be able to do that. They're going to love the idea of marketing. And marketing is going to take off as a profession and as a way to change society. And then we're also going to see novels created not for the sake of literary masterpieces, but the novels for the sake of entertainment. Welcome to the birth of science fiction. This is going to be an entire genre of literature that is not done for the sake of changing people's ideas of the world or revolutionizing how we view our souls. It's going to be what's entertaining to read. Jules Verne will become the father of modern science fiction with his book 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, where he tells the stories of the Nautilus, this great submarine traveling around the world. Or even greater influence is felt by H.G. Wells and his Time Machine, where they talk about humans going back and forth through time and how we will evolve and how we have evolved. Or even his greatest masterpiece, and that's War of the Worlds, a novel that will be transformed into a radio broadcast that literally makes the world believe the world is under attack by Martians. It is something that transforms American society here and has a lasting impact in Europe as well. And really one of the true instances of media playing a catastrophic, in this case, or massively influential role in people's lives. And you should watch it. I actually have a link on the Moodle page to actually listen to an hour-long broadcast of H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds, portrayed by Orson Welles. One of the greatest depictions of modern pop culture that you could ever have. Well, this is not going to be just restricted to what's happening in schools too, folks. We're going to see science in and of itself dramatically change during this period, and it's largely due to a guy by the name of Auguste Comte, who comes up with an idea known as positivism. And positivism is going to look to reassess how we understand knowledge in and of itself. And he hypothesizes that there are three stages or eras of human understanding. There is a theological era. And this theological stage or era, as he proposes, is that Up to this point in human development, we just assumed that things happened in the universe because angels and demons did it, or that gods and devils dictated it. That is how change in action takes place. Well, the second stage of human understanding is the metaphysical stage. And what he believes this period is going to be roughly during the time of the Middle Ages and the Reformation, where things that happen in the world happen because God created a process that allows it to take place. So the reason why ice melts is not because the temperature gets too high, is because that is the law that is in place because God made it that way, not due to the physical or chemical reaction that takes place because of changing temperatures. And then lastly, the final stage, and this is going to be the stage that Kant believes that humanity is now moving towards, is a positive stage. In this period, we are now no longer assuming that things are the way they are because God made them that way, but things are the way they are because there are laws of physics that dictate that. Ice melts because we know that above 32 degrees Fahrenheit, that is what ice does. It becomes a liquid. It evaporates at 200 and I believe 20 degrees Fahrenheit at a boiling point. That is because those are the laws of physics. We don't accept God's will as a reason as to why things happen anymore. And this is going to change how people view everything. We're going to start to believe that you can look at people's behavior and view it just like you view other aspects of science. And welcome to the birth of sociology. Humans are judged and can be quantified in the same way as why a rainbow takes place. And this is going to change everything for people. Science in and of itself is going to become the predominant way people want to view the world, and this is going to create a massive conflict between science and religion. No longer is just God wills it an acceptable answer anymore. People are going to start to become skeptical to everything that is happening during this period, and really everything that they've been told entirely up to this point in their life. We call this intellectual skepticism. Just because something is an adhered belief does not mean you have to believe it or that it's correct. So we're going to start to look back at church traditions, and particularly the Bible, and reassess whether or not it's true. And the church is going to struggle during this time period because it doesn't really have a lot of answers to the questions that are being raised. David Friedrich Strauss is going to attempt to reassess the life of Jesus in and of himself in his cataclysmically important novel, The Life of Jesus. He's going to question whether or not Jesus was an actual person, or whether he was actually just a story being told by Jewish writers during this period to create the ideal Jew. Or what about looking at the Bible itself and applying scientific reasoning to it? Scientific skepticism is going to look at things such as the proposed length of human existence that exists in the Bible, the idea that the earth is roughly 10,000 years old and that man has been on it for all 10,000 years, and say, I don't know if I believe that. In fact, geology is telling me that the earth is much, 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 much older than that. Not to mention Charles Darwin's proposal that humanity actually evolved from other species of animals such as primates. But we'll talk about a lot more Darwin's theory of evolution later on. Or what about moral skepticism? What about the fact that in the Old Testament, God is not exactly your happy-go-lucky, save all humanity and the souls of everyone is redeemable when he's smiting cities like Sodom and Gomorrah, or he's wiping out civilization with the flood. And people are literally going to question whether or not we should be worshiping God, because God is not fun. God is not pleasant. God is not something that is really uplifting to people's view of the world. Or you can take the approach of Friedrich Nietzsche and say that God is actually an opiate. He is keeping humanity from reaching its true potential. And that not only should we not believe or practice faith, doing so is actually detrimental to our development. But we'll talk about more Nietzsche later on too, as arguably the greatest philosopher of this time period, at least most influential. While this is going to have a huge impact in the church, they're not really going to know how to deal with this during their time period. We're going to see enrollment in churches drop dramatically throughout Europe. They are really just incapable of dealing with the struggles and the questions that are coming during this period. Some of it is due to not having ever been questioned like this in its life prior. Some of it has to do with just lack of resources. The population of Europe is growing at an alarming rate, and there really isn't even enough churches for people to go to anymore. So entire generations of people will never step foot in a church because there just aren't enough churches in these new metropolitan cities. Religious orders in and of themselves aren't going to be a huge feature of this new society because more people can have jobs now. There was no need to have your daughter or your son join a religious order because now they can get a job in a factory or they can become a tradesperson or a merchant, and those are jobs that are now readily available for people. So this is going to have a huge impact on the Catholic Church. And it doesn't really even get better. They're also going to face struggles from nations and their governments, and what is the role and what should be the role of church in those nations. Up to this point, the Catholic Church, or Christianity as a whole, has been the sole proprietor of education in European history. And that is now changing. Due to the increased investment in public schools, churches are no longer going to have that control over who gets to read or what gets to be taught to kids. And this is going to marginalize them dramatically. In France, we see a massive split between the Church and the Third Republic as they adamantly hate each other. One is a huge force of conservatism, and one is built exclusively on liberalism. And this is not a problem that's going to go away easily. In fact, they're actually going to completely separate the two entities in 1905. But that isn't even the biggest issue the Church has to deal with when it comes to another government, and that's going to be the Kulturkampf in Germany. And almost what becomes a one-on-one battle between the Pope and Otto von Bismarck, we're going to see a knockdown, drag-out fight as to whether or not the Church should have any role in a newly unified Germany. And this comes because originally Bismarck had no interest in dealing with religion at all. In fact, he left to local ministers and local political figures, but when the Church continues to grow and try to unify in providing itself more and more influence in Germany, he views it as a threat to his new nation. So he attempts to rid himself of the entire Catholic Church in Germany and the May Laws of 1873, where he literally exiles or imprisons the entire set of bishops in Germany. Well, this is going to create a huge political disaster for Bismarck because as much as he would like to stop the growth of Christianity or the growth of Catholicism in Germany, he really can't. And we've talked about this before, you really cannot kill an idea no matter how hard you try. And it's probably the only true disaster that Bismarck deals with during his time as Prime Minister. Not everything is bad, though, for the Catholic Church during this time period. We do see revival movements break out in France and Ireland. The French will actually believe their loss to the Prussians is due to their sinfulness, and they must reform their ways. The Irish just happen to be extraordinarily Catholic no matter what happens to them. And the British will even see Protestantism continue to grow during this time period due to the Anglican Church. But the Catholic Church takes a different approach to this. Their attempt to modernize during this time period is to change their focus of control on people's lives, and that is no longer looking to have secular control due to the fact that they no longer have any. With the unification of Italy and the loss of Rome to this unified Italy, the Vatican really only has Vatican City left to control. So they're going to look to control people's Christian faith. And in Council Vatican I, we're actually going to see the birth of papal infallibility, the belief that the Pope cannot be wrong in dealing with any matter of faith. And this is also going to be reflected by future popes' attempts to modernize the Church, believing that collective bargaining and fair pay for workers is going to be a key feature of Christian lifestyle, only to have some of it eventually overturned by future popes. And then we're also going to see a different approach to the faith of Islam. Islam during this time period, as you guys have remembered from earlier time periods, is not really going to be viewed on the same page as Christianity or even Judaism. In fact, most people believe it's just a cultural phenomenon that will become extinct in the very near future. Well, Ernst Renan believes that Islam in and of itself cannot survive in a modern world where science is the predominant feature of life. And we're going to see opponents, probably the first and only time that an outspoken believer of Islam goes up against European thought, and it's going to be Jamal al-Din al-Afghani, who believes that no, you're wrong, it can evolve, and that the faith is designed to be a modern faith. And we're going to see movements throughout this period attempt to deal with changing European beliefs of Islam, whether it's the Salafi movement or just do we abandon everything the Europeans say begin with, and we have European rejectionism. So Europe is going through a massive overhaul in how it works from here on out. Every way people think is evolving and changing, and this is going to translate to everyone's lives across Europe. And with that, we are done, and you guys have a wonderful weekend. Thanks, and goodbye.